The widow had no money, no hired hands, and winter was only days away. When a wary mountain man arrived with his 2 hungry children, she expected him to ask for food. Instead, he looked at her broken fence, collapsing barn, an empty firewood pile, and quietly said, "Give my kids shelter, and I'll fix your homestead." She thought he was making a promise no man could keep, but before winter ended, his kindness would save her ranch, and her forgiveness would save his broken heart. Stay until the very end, because the mountain man's final gift to the widow will leave you speechless. If you love heartwarming Wild West stories about kindness, faith, sacrifice, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. The last warm days of autumn were fading when Daniel Harper guided his old wagon toward a lonely homestead on the edge of the prairie. Beside him sat his young son, Ben, while his little daughter, Emma, slept beneath a worn blanket. Their cabin had been destroyed by a mountain fire months earlier, and since then they had wandered from town to town looking for honest work instead of charity. Daniel believed a man's hands should earn every meal his children ate. As they reached the weathered ranch, he noticed broken fences, a leaning barn, empty corrals, and smoke barely rising from the old chimney. A young widow named Sarah stepped cautiously onto the porch. Though exhausted from months of struggle, she still carried herself with quiet dignity. Daniel removed his hat and spoke gently. "Ma'am, my children need a roof before the snow comes. Give them shelter, and I'll repair everything on this homestead." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You'd work for nothing but a place to sleep." Daniel smiled. "My children need warmth more than I need money." She looked at the little boy holding his sister's hand and finally nodded. "You can stay in the old bunkhouse." Before sunrise the next morning, Daniel was already repairing the broken corral. He chopped firewood until huge stacks stood beside the house, strengthened the barn roof, fixed leaking windows, and repaired gates that hadn't closed properly in years. Every evening he quietly refused extra payment, accepting only simple meals and a warm place for his children to sleep. Ben helped gather wood while little Emma followed Sarah around the farmhouse, filling the once silent home with laughter. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah smiled without forcing it. Yet not everyone welcomed Daniel's kindness. Neighbor Silas Boone, a greedy rancher who had long hoped Sarah would abandon her land so he could buy it cheaply, watched with growing anger. Every repaired fence and healthy calf ruined his plans. "That mountain man is standing in my way," he muttered. "He won't stay once winter begins." But Daniel wasn't working for land or reward. He simply wanted his children to know that kindness could still survive in a hard world. As the first icy wind swept across the prairie, Sarah realized something unexpected. The stranger she had welcomed out of pity was slowly becoming the strongest foundation her home had ever known, and perhaps the answer to prayers she had whispered every lonely night. Winter arrived earlier than anyone expected. Bitter winds swept across the prairie, covering the fields with snow and turning every chore into a battle against the cold. But unlike neighboring ranches that struggled to survive, Sarah's homestead stood stronger each day because Daniel had spent weeks preparing for the harsh season. The fences held firm against the wind, the barn roof no longer leaked, and enough chopped firewood filled the shed to keep the family warm for months. Every morning before daylight, Daniel saddled his horse to check the cattle before returning to repair another small part of the ranch. He never complained, never asked for wages, and never reminded Sarah of the promise she had made. His only reward was seeing his children sleeping safely under a solid roof. Sarah watched him quietly from the porch one freezing morning. She had never met a man who worked so hard for people who owed him nothing. Slowly, the loneliness that had filled her heart since losing her husband began to disappear. Little Emma followed Sarah everywhere, helping bake bread and feed the chickens, while Ben proudly learned how to mend fences beside Daniel. Lauder returned to the old farmhouse, replacing the silence that had haunted every room. One afternoon, a violent blizzard rolled across the valley without warning. Snow fell so heavily that visibility disappeared within minutes. As everyone hurried to secure the livestock, Sarah suddenly realized 2 young calves had wandered beyond the north pasture. Before she could stop him, Daniel grabbed a lantern and disappeared into the storm. Hours passed. The wind howled louder. Sarah stood by the window praying for his safety, while Ben and Emma waited silently beside the fire. Just as hope began to fade, the front door burst open. Daniel stumbled inside, carrying one frightened calf over his shoulders while pulling the second behind him with a rope. His coat was covered in ice, his hands were bleeding, and his face was pale from the freezing cold. "You could have died," Sarah cried as she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Daniel smiled weakly. "They're part of your future." That night Sarah gently cleaned the cuts on his hands while he sat quietly beside the fire. Neither of them spoke much, but in the silence they both understood something had changed. This was no longer an agreement between strangers. It had become a friendship built on sacrifice, trust, and quiet respect. Watching from across the valley, Silas Boone grew furious. Every day Daniel remained on the ranch made Sarah stronger and destroyed his dream of buying her land for almost nothing. "If kindness won't drive him away," Silas growled, "then fear will." Under the cover of darkness, he quietly rode toward Sarah's ranch with a cruel plan that would place the mountain man, the widow, and their children in greater danger than any winter storm. The greatest test of Daniel's courage was no longer the freezing wilderness. It was the evil of another man. Late that night, Silas Boone quietly cut the ranch fences, hoping Sarah's cattle would escape into the snow. By sunrise, panic spread across the homestead as frightened cattle wandered toward the frozen hills. Without hesitation, Daniel saddled his horse. "I'm bringing them home," he said. Ben grabbed his father's coat. "Please be careful." Daniel smiled. "I always come back." For hours he fought the bitter wind, gathering every frightened animal and driving them safely into the barn. When he returned, exhausted and freezing, Sarah noticed the clean knife marks on the broken fence. "This wasn't an accident," she whispered. "The sheriff was called." After questioning several ranch hands, the truth came out. Silas had destroyed the fences, hoping Sarah would lose everything and be forced to sell her land. The townspeople were furious. Silas was arrested, and his plan collapsed. Standing before everyone, Sarah looked at Daniel with grateful eyes. "You saved this ranch." Daniel shook his head. "No, I only kept a promise." A few days later, the first snowfall ended. Golden sunlight covered the peaceful prairie. Sarah walked to the old bunkhouse where Daniel was packing his family's belongings. "Where are you going?" she asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "Our agreement is finished. You gave my children shelter. I fixed your homestead. We're even?" Sarah gently placed a hand on his arm. "We're not. My house became a home because of you. My heart did too." Little Emma hugged Sarah's waist. Ben smiled. "We don't want to leave." A tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Then don't." She looked at Daniel. "This ranch has room for all of us, if you'll stay." For the first time in years, Daniel's lonely heart felt at peace. He took Sarah's hand. "I'd be honored." As spring replaced winter, the once abandoned homestead became known as the happiest ranch in the valley. The children laughed in the fields, neighbors gathered around warm supper tables, and Daniel proved that the strongest homes are not built with nails and timber. They are built with kindness, honesty, sacrifice, and love. If this story warmed your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes that kindness can change a life. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Wild West story.